Josh Maddux was born on March 9, 1990, and lived in Woodland Park, a town of around 8,000 people in Pike National Forest, Teller County, Colorado. His parents divorced, and Josh lived with his father, Mike, and two sisters, Kate and Ruth. The one in the picture there is Ruth. He was long-haired, 6 feet tall, blonde-haired, and weighed around 150 pounds. He had a carefree attitude to life, loved music, and spent much of his time writing or playing the guitar. At school, he was bright and well-liked. 2 years before Josh's disappearance on June 1st, 2006, a week before his high school graduation, his older brother Zachary, who's 18, commits suicide after suffering from severe depression. Mike Maddux, his father, said, "I buried his older brother 2 years before, and it was so difficult on Josh. When his brother died, it pushed him over the edge. It was a big shock for the family and a big shock for Josh. He thought highly of his older brother." Despite this, Josh had been doing well and was happy with his life. So on May 8, 2008, Josh left the house, telling his sister Kate he was going for a walk. He often went hiking alone, so when his sister saw him at home before he left, she thought little of it. But when he failed to return later that evening, the family becomes worried. On May 13, 5 days after the disappearance, his father, Mike, calls the police to report Josh missing. Mike said, "I got up one morning and Josh was there, and then he never came home the next day. He still didn't come home. I called his friends, but nobody had seen him. Nobody knows where he is." So the search for Josh begins. The authorities, friends, and family sourced the neighborhood and nearby parkland area where Josh may decided to go walking. After months of searching, nothing had been uncovered, and hopes faded. Josh's sister, Kate, hoped he had left town to go play music or start a different life. She wrote of her brother's disappearance. "Since Josh was 18, it has been reasonable to assume he may have decided to leave town and to start a new life. As one of his two older sisters, I have always believed this was the case. I have expected Josh to return home to my father's house at any time with a wife and small children so they can meet their grandparents and 2 aunts. Josh has always been known for his musical and literary talent, so maybe we would find him playing music with the band on tour or catch him writing successful novels under a pen name so that he could keep his preferred lifestyle of solitude in the woods." The police had no reason to suspect any foul play and list him as the missing person. So now we get into 2015. Chuck Murphy, he was 80 years old, is a builder from Colorado Springs, was demolishing his old house. So that's the wood cabin he was demolishing his old wood cabin on Meadowlark Lane in a large area of land surrounded by tall pine trees. So Chuck had initially purchased the cabin in 1950s. It was normally it was formerly the homestead of Thunderhead Ranch on Rampart Range Road on Woodland Park's north side. It was an infamous dining, drinking, and gambling complex owned by Big Bird Bergstrom in the 1930s to 50s. He had come to America from Sweden in 1912, and the Thunderhead Inn as a dining and drinking establishment ran the Thunderhead Inn as a dining and drinking establishment after the end of the Prohibition. He also used the ranch as an illegal gambling and prostitution den, and FBI then arrested him. In the subsequent trial, the jury found him not guilty. The cabin had since been used for a decade and had been fallen into disrepair. Chuck had decided to demolish the cabin to make way for property development. And in August 2015, demolition work started. Chuck's brother had lived in the cabin until 2005, but since moving out, it had become a storage facility that was rarely visited. Animals had been a problem, and there was a noticeable stench when Chuck came to the cabin on August 7th. As the workers dismantled the chimney, one of the two in the cabin using an excavator and reached the interior, Chuck makes a horrific discovery of a body of a young man. This is gonna be really graphic, so just be careful. So trigger warning, gave it out. So he makes a horrific discovery of a body of a young man cramped in a fetal position with his legs above his heads. He called the police, who arrived with the county coroner, who later, with the help of dental records, positively identified the body to be that of the missing man, Josh Maddux. The Maddux family, shocked by the news of the discovery of Josh's body, his sister Kate said, "The situation doesn't make sense at all. We were really expecting him to be anywhere else in the world, and he was actually very close. The only thing we can figure is he was being an 18-year-old checking out the cabin. It already had been abandoned for a long time, and a horrible accident happened." The cabin was only 2 blocks from the Maddux home, yet the searches for Josh had overlooked the building. There was no sign of life and no reason to check a chimney there. Chuck Murphy, the cabin owner himself, had rarely visited it. However, on the occasions he had to check in, he had noticed nothing unusual about the property, like the smell of a decaying corpse. Since the cabin stood centrally in a large plot of land surrounded by tall pines around 50 feet from the road, police suggested that with no adjacent homes, if Josh had cried for help, no one would be able to hear him regardless. So, the investigations into Josh's death, the Delaware County coroner Al Bourne did an autopsy and found no evidence of any drugs in Josh's remains. He said the hard tissue showed no signs of trauma. There was no broken bones, no knife marks. There was no bullet holes. There is so far no answer to a number of things. It is very confusing. It was not an instant death. How he died is only a matter of speculation. But we know he did not starve to death, because that takes many weeks. So then you go down the chain. You have dehydration, which just takes a few days, and the other thing would be hyperthermia, which could take a day or two. We have no evidence to say which came first. On September 28, 2015, Bourne made a ruling of accidental death. He speculated Josh climbed the chimney and became stuck in the brickwork. Bourne stated that Josh's position in the chimney appeared to have been a voluntary act to gain access. He concluded the most likely cause of death was hypothermia, as the temperature around the time of his disappearance between May 8 and 10, 2008 had dropped to the high 20s, which is negative 6.6 degrees Celsius. Alright, get rid of that. So anyways, so there were some discrepancies in the coroner's report. So many locals had issues with the coroner's report, including the family. Chucks questioned the coroner's conclusion of accidental death, as the chimney had been built 20 years before. During its construction, it was fitted with thick wire mesh hung from steel hooks to keep animals and debris from becoming lodged inside the chimney or from entering the cabin itself. Murphy said it was a heavy wire gate, a wire mesh. I installed it across the chimney, about one row of bricks from the top. We didn't want trouble with the raccoons and things getting into the chimney. Bourne thought the grate could have been rusted or corroded and stated nobody saw the metal mesh. We didn't see it in any of our photos. It may have disappeared. Murphy responded that all the metal work had been collected and taken for scrap during the demolition. This explained why the coroner did not identify the mesh. As it wasn't anywhere near the chimney, they were just gathering up the steel, angle iron, and the things as part of the demolition. Murphy said they had no idea the mesh had any significance. Conceding to Murphy, Bourne reopened the case 3 days after his initial conclusion. It was not only the rebar that caused doubt about the original autopsy. For example, a large wooden breakfast bar that had been torn from a wall in the kitchen and dragged over to block the chimney from inside the cabin raised further suspicion. If the breakfast bar had been torn from the wall, then who had done it and why? Josh's body had been found in a fetal position with his legs above his head, disjoined from his torso. He would have had to have entered the chimney head first to get into such a position. This was a somewhat unusual position, and Bourne had earlier commented that he thought it would have taken two people to position him in such a fashion. What was even stranger was that when Josh's body had been found, he was wearing only a thin thermal shirt, and his clothes had been found inside the cabin folded up next to the fireplace. Bourne said of his evidence, "This one really taxed our brains. We found his clothing just outside the firebox. He had on only a thermal t-shirt. We don't know why he took his clothes off, took his shoes off and socks off, and why he went outside, climbed on the roof and went down the chimney. It was not linear thinking." The revised autopsy report said the cause of death was accidental death, murder, or undetermined causes. Bourne said, "We've come up with the most plausible explanation, and it will remain an accident. He did not come down the chimney. That's our conclusion." Murphy said, "There's no way that guy crawled inside that chimney with that steel webbing. He didn't come down the chimney, and he remained convinced that Josh's death had been no accident, adding he was only wearing his thermal shirt, no pants, no shoes or socks." Murphy said it was ridiculous to think the teen stripped down to just his shirt, climbed up on the roof and then the chimney, and slid down knowing he'd be trapped. That's actually really spooky. Like, why would somebody just go up naked, especially like if you're like outside? That's crazy. So here's some theories. So the police received several anonymous tip-offs suggesting leads and naming suspects that had bragged of killing Josh. One such suspect was now incarcerated in a Texas jail and had previous time in Seattle and Portland prisons with a long history of violent crime. One tip-off had informed the police that this man had been seen with Josh. When speaking, the man Alborn said, "They can't give me times and specifics, and we can't generate stuff that goes back 7 years." Bourne also doubted that the man would have been able to put Josh in the chimney alone. In 2015, a post on Reddit gave a name to the suspect just mentioned. The post said, "I went to high school with this skinny, dorky hippie named Andy who played guitar in a band. I was never good friends with him or anything, but a year or so after I graduated, one of my good friends, Josh, started hanging out with him and then went missing. Turns out that in addition to becoming a lot scarier looking, Andy had indeed headed down to New Mexico where he found himself shooting the shit with the caretaker of a disabled guy and got invited over to their apartment. Caretaker gets in the shower, and when he comes back out, the disabled guy is stabbed to death and Andy's gone. When Andy got arrested, he also claimed to have killed a woman in Tail and stuffed her body in a barrel. The cops had indeed found a woman stuffed in a barrel in Tail. already had somebody in custody for it and decided to stick with that guy instead. Years later, I found out the caretaker had died in a bar fight, and without him, the cops didn't have much in the way of evidence somehow. So the case against Andy was dropped too. Several of us went to the cops saying, "Yo, Joshua who went missing was last seen with Andy, who's a murderer. Maybe you should check that out." Despite a fair amount of pestering, nothing ever really came of it, and by nothing I mean that the police mostly didn't even return our calls, and once accidentally canceled the bulletin on Josh because he's alive and well and living in the next town over. That's what they said on the bulletin, but he wasn't. He was actually in the chimney of an abandoned cabin like 2 blocks from his parents' house. The coroner said the body had been there for about 7 years and ruled the death accidental, concluding that Josh had probably climbed down the chimney in an attempt to break the house and gotten stuck, which, given the age of the corpse, doesn't seem overly ridiculous, except for the fact that in addition to Josh having last been seen with Andy immediately before his stabbing spree, people called in to report having heard rumors that Andy was bragging about having put Josh in a hole. Somebody had ripped a heavy bar off the wall in the kitchen and propped it against the fireplace, or the fact that Josh's stuff was already inside the cabin, meaning A, he'd already broken in and would have had to lock himself out to go for the chimney, and B, he might have noticed that either the flue or the big bar would have prevented him from getting in through the fireplace, or the fact when he was found, Josh's knees were above his head, which sounds to me like he would have to go in head first. Or maybe the fact that Josh was barefoot and naked from the waist down. This is just my opinion, but I don't care who you are. You don't try to climb a chimney. You don't try to climb head first into a chimney via a hole rusted through a metal crate with your dick hanging out. As far as I can tell, nobody even bothered to call Andy to ask if he knew anything. By the way, from what I hear, Andy's still out and about doing his thing when he's not in a mental hospital. All I'm saying is I wish that they had done some police shit, open an investigation, try to track down some lead, interview some folks who've been calling in for tips for the last 7 years, maybe check for some semen or something, I don't know. Don't just say accidental. Dust off your hands and call it a day. Andy's full name. This is who Andy is. So that's Andy, whose name is Andrew Richard Newman. He's been arrested on suspicion of fatal stabbing in New Mexico and is currently serving time. He's also been arrested before for trespassing as well. So some conclusions on the case is that Chuck Murphy, the cabin owner, said it's a real a tragic, terrible story. All I know is he did not go down the chimney. He got in the fireplace and went up, but why? I think it will remain a mystery. One of those sad stories. The case is bizarre and perplexing. Several questions come to mind. The rebar in the chimney would have prevented anyone's entry unless it was removed before the demolition or rusted away, as suggested by the coroner. Why would Josh remove his clothes and leave them by the fireplace in his boots? Why was the breakfast bar dragged to cover the fireplace entrance inside the cabin? So, that's the story on Josh. It's still unsolved, and Andy is, I believe, he's in custody. He's under arrest, I'm pretty sure right now. But he's also been brought in for trespassing before as well, so it's not his first time, if anything. I'm curious to think, what do you guys think happened to Josh? Do you guys think it was an accident? Do you think he was actually killed? I think he was killed because nobody just takes off their clothes just to go look up in a chimney. There's nothing really so spectacular up a chimney, right? I think it was Andy who killed him. It's hard to put any evidence against Andy in this situation, because one, the body was found several years after, so having evidence now, it's all pretty much destroyed, if anything. Especially they were doing demolition, so it's going to be hard to find fingerprints. semen, stuff like that, right? If anything of that situation did happen. And to go head first into a chimney is kind of just stupid. Somebody might have pushed him. Or, like, especially with your clothes are off. Like, dude, like, you're not taking your clothes off just to go back up the roof, just to climb it, to look under a chimney. Like, there's no pot of gold in that chimney. And I'm pretty sure this guy, Josh, knew as well. So that's why I'm kind of leaning towards it was foul play. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Leave a comment, like, and a subscribe. Thank you so much. And I wish everybody a great New Year ahead. And I will continue to post. Thank you so much for the support. It really means a lot to me. And yeah, thank you so much. And stay tuned for the next video. If you want to hear, if you guys have any recommendations on what video or what subject I should cover next, please let me know. And I would love to dive into that. Thank you.